In this video, I'm going to explain the steps I took to run a sub 3 hour marathon in just under 2 years of training. I want to show you the tips, the tricks, and try to give you like a step-by-step guide on how I did this within 2 years. There really isn't any secrets here, just a lot of consistency, a lot of knowledge that went into training. I'm a doctor of physical therapy, I'm a strength and conditioning coach, and I've been training for various sports, strength sports, endurance sports for the last 10 years of my life. Before I got into running though, I was more of, I guess, a strength athlete, like I did powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, but I was never really that great at either one of those things. I never really applied all of the knowledge that I had, and I never really set my priorities straight. I was not able to be as consistent as someone needs to be if they want to be truly, really good at something. I have all this knowledge from my strength and conditioning background, from being a physical therapist, and I finally was able to apply this to running. The thing that, honestly, man, I love this the most now, and I'm never going back. Just 2 years ago, I was over 230 pounds, about 175 now, and I just randomly picked up running on a whim just because I wanted to try and lose some weight. And I figured, hey, burn some extra calories from running. I mean, it's pretty straightforward from that. It's not really how it works. It is calories in, calories out. But anyway, I picked up running just for some extra calorie burning, and lo and behold, 2 years later, I'm running a sub 3 hour marathon. So how did I do this? A lot goes into this training process, but if there's one thing you have to know, that you will not be able to get around being unbelievably consistent every single day, every single week, for months on end. There was not a single week in the last 2 years that I did not run at least 4 days in that week, unless I was physically ill or was not able to have any time available for me to run, which even then is still a little bit too much of an excuse. And so if you say you don't have time, and you don't have a kid like me, and you have a fiance that honestly takes really good care of things around the house, and really your only responsibility are your friends, family, and your job, then you have time. So you don't get to make any excuses there. Now, I can't speak to having 3 kids. I don't have any kids. So if you do, I'm sorry. It's definitely more challenging, but I think some of the tips I can give you today will help. Anyway, so consistency, number 1. If you don't have it, you're not going to get better. You have to keep running even when you don't want to. You have to schedule your week out so you know exactly what days you need to be doing what run, how far you're going to be running on what days of the week, and what time of the day are you going to run. If you take care of all of this, then you will have a much lower barrier in order to actually start this run, okay? And with that lower barrier, you'll be able to get out the door a lot sooner. You'll have more time for other things in your day that you'll inevitably need to be doing. However, I will say, over this process, you're gonna have to start to say no to a lot of stuff. If you truly want to make progress as fast as some people are able to make progress, as fast as I was able to make progress, you can't do what you used to do. You can't drink, you can't do drugs, you can't go to bed late, you can't eat random stuff that you feel like eating. You need to make sure you eat enough protein. You need to make sure you eat enough carbohydrates. You need to make sure you drink enough water. You need to make sure you have enough electrolytes in your system. You need to do everything you can to not be stressed from work. You need to be able to relax on the weekends if you can. So that means getting rid of other things in your life that do not fit the goal of running this sub-3 hour marathon. Obviously, you can't get rid of everything else in your life. You still have to spend time with your family. You should still spend time with your friends. You need to make money, most likely, unless you're a professional athlete, which if you are, thank you for watching my video, but you probably don't need my advice, right? So with all of that, you just need to learn to say no. Set your priorities straight. If your priorities are straight, you know what you want, you have the clarity, have some clarity. You have the clarity to make the right decisions. You have the clarity to be prepared to do your training every single day, and you'll ideally understand why you're doing this in the first place. You know, you got to figure out, why do you even want to run a sub-3 hour marathon, right? Like, what's really the point? Why does anyone do this? I like to think it's so that we can do hard things. We can show ourselves, prove ourselves right in saying that I can set my mind to something. You can set your mind to something if you so choose to do it. For me, my motivating factor is I was never really a good athlete. You know, for a long time, I drank way too much. I partied too much. I gave in to quick and easy satisfaction and feel good things in life. And I always wanted more. I always wanted to be a successful athlete. I always wanted to be a better athlete. And so I've gained all this knowledge to learn how to become one, but all that other stuff still got in the way. And I finally got rid of all of those things that were stopping me from becoming a better athlete. And I applied all my knowledge to running, and now I was able to run this sub-3 hour marathon. So that's my motivation. I always wanted to be a better athlete. And I'm telling you this because you need to find what motivates you, what inspires you. Why in the hell do you want to run this many times a week? Because it's not necessary to do that. You don't need to run sub-3 hours to be healthy. I didn't do it to be a healthy person, honestly. I'm not that interested in health. I'm interested in performance. And I'm interested in being good at something. I'm interested in doing things that are hard, setting my mind on something and doing what I said I'm gonna do. You know, a long time ago, I would say I'm gonna do something and it ends up just being a phase. I still go through this to this day pretty often, but this is the one thing that I stuck to, and I think you can stick to it too if you follow some of these principles, and if you follow some of the advice I've given so far. Moving on. So that's the priorities, that's the consistency. Let's get down to some brass tacks. How the hell do you train for this thing, right? If you're starting from zero, like I did, then you're in the right place. I'm gonna try to give you a little bit more step-by-step guide on how to get there. I just need you to stick through, watch the video. I'm not even sure how long it's gonna be at this point, but you watch towards the end, you're gonna find out how I got from 0 miles per week all the way up to 60 miles per week consistently, to where I could run 26.2 miles at a 6:50 per mile pace. I finished this race in 2 hours and 57 minutes and 53 seconds. Yes, I know the exact time, and you will too if you achieve it, trust me. So moving on. You basically, you know, you've heard it before. You got to sleep 8-9 hours a night if you can. You try to do your best to do that. It's not easy. There's some nights where I got 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, 7 hours of sleep. But if I'm looking out, extrapolating out 2 years, that average is still up between like that 7 and 9 hours of sleep per night. Okay. Eating. I used to be really into bodybuilding. I spent a long time learning about nutrition. And so this was something that I was able to pick up pretty easily for running. More or less, you need to make sure you continue to get enough protein, somewhere around 0.8 grams per pound of body weight should suffice if you are of a normal BMI. If you're holding on to a little bit more body fat, that number can change. You don't need as much protein. You want to go more off of what your potential lean body mass would be. And so that's protein. As far as carbohydrates go, you pretty much just need to fill in everything with carbohydrates, whatever you can get down, right? So if you don't need to lose any weight in order to run the sub 3 hour marathon, you start hammering carbs like now. Rice, potatoes, bread, anything you can get your hands on, anything that digests a little bit easier, that's going to help you get that number a little bit more. And then you need to have about 0.3 grams per kilogram, or somewhere around 0.2 grams per pound of body weight of fat. This is just something that is required in your body for any general bodily functions, for hormone function, for thyroid function. Pretty much everything that keeps your body moving is required through fat. As far as carbohydrates go, your brain runs off of glucose, which is the simplest form of carbohydrate. So you need to have enough for your brain, obviously, but you also need to have enough to fuel your performance, right? So enough carbohydrates to fuel your performance. I mean, it's really tough to say exactly how much. People see like these carbohydrate profiles or these carbohydrate protocols that will tell you to have like 600 to 800 grams of carbs per day. You don't really need to do that. You don't need to go crazy with it, but just make sure you're eating enough so that you're not losing too much weight while you continue to add mileage, right? And that's also considering if you're at a normal BMI, if you were like me and you were I was probably somewhere around like 30% body fat when I started. I lost almost 60 pounds, and that right there made me a lot faster. In that case, like, you do need to be in a calorie deficit, but when you add all this running in, it's gonna be a lot easier to be in that calorie deficit. But it's still good to have good habits in general when you do it, okay? Next, I think it's extremely important to have somewhat of a strength training history. If you don't already have a strength training background, then this video might not be for you. I'm talking about some of this stuff with the caveat of I already had quite a bit of general strength built up. I've deadlifted over 500 pounds before. I've squatted 400 pounds before. I've done extensive plyometric training in the past, so jump training, speed training, stuff so that I can be a faster sprinter. Stuff where I can jump higher for basketball, or just because it's fun to be able to jump high. It's fun to be able to run fast. So I do have this training. So number one thing that I would start with is you have to be fast enough to run a 3 hour marathon. If your mile PR is only 6:30 per mile or 6-minute mile, then you're never going to run 26.2 at a 3 hour pace. You have to be just generally fast. And I'm not talking about like a 400 meter run or an 800 meter run or a mile run. I'm talking like 50 meters or 50 feet or 100 meters on the track, like a 100 meter dash. You got to find out what your time is for that, okay? If you can only run 100 meters in 18 seconds, That's roughly a 5-minute mile pace. And then you fizzle out, you can't run much faster than that, then I'm sorry, but you're never gonna run a sub 3 hour marathon. You are not fast enough. You need to be able to run at least under 14 seconds per 100, which is still pretty slow considering how fast other people are. I made sure that I was able to stay under 13 seconds during the entirety of my training in the last 2 years. The fastest I've ever gone was just under 12 seconds. So really, I'm not that fast. I think it's extremely achievable for most people to get under 13 seconds in a 100-meter dash. You just have to train correctly. And that means that you have to basically do sprint training like a track sprinter would. And I'm not going to get into all the details of what that looks like in this video, but that's the number one thing. You've got to be fast enough. If you're not fast enough, if you don't run 100 meters under 13 seconds, you're probably not ever going to run a sub 3 hour marathon. I just don't think that it's possible. Maybe you can have an unbelievable engine and be extremely efficient for that distance, but it will help you so much if you can just run a little bit faster at these short distances. Okay, next, you need to build up your mileage, and you need to do it freaking slowly. People add miles to their training program so fast, and I don't know how some of them get away with it and don't get hurt when they just first start running, but most people don't. That's why the running injury rate is so high compared to a sport like bodybuilding or powerlifting or Olympic weightlifting. It is so much more impact onto our bodies that we need more time for our bodies to adapt to it. If you don't give your body that time, you're gonna get injured, okay? However, it's important to note our bodies do adapt to this stuff. You just have to give it time. You have to give it the right fuel. You have to give it the right amount of sleep, and you have to be intelligent with your training. The simplest way I can say to add mileage is to, 1, make sure you're going slow enough. 2, make sure you do not add any more than what you're able to recover from. Now, sometimes people give like a 10% rule. I don't really think that works super well, especially if you're only running, 8 miles a week at the start and you only add 10% onto that. You're only going to add maybe 1 mile. That's tough. That's tough to do. It's going to take a while. But for the first 3 to 6 months of me starting running, that's what I had to do. I started with maybe 6 miles in the week. And then for the first month of training, I stuck at that 6 miles. On the 5th week of training, I'd take it down to 3 just to make sure I recovered. This whole time I was doing sprint training. I was still doing strength training. So as I'm building up this mileage, I'm keeping that speed. I'm keeping that strength as good as I can. Eventually your strength will go a little bit. The more mileage you run, it's just you're not going to be able to tolerate as heavy of lifting. That's okay. Further, if you use the 10% rule, you only add 10% of mileage per week, that will eventually become a perfect thing. Like, let's say you can go 10 miles a week for the first 6 weeks of running. That's great. You're then allow your body to adapt to that, and then take a week where you slowly ramp up to about 15 miles in that week, and then see if you can hold 15 miles for a couple of weeks, and then deload. A deload is where you do 50% less total volume. So deload away from that 15 miles per week and then slowly build up again. So it ends up looking like this stepwise progression where, let's say month 1, you have 5 miles a week. Month 2, you got 10 miles a week. Month 3, you got 15 miles a week. Month 4, still can only do 15 miles a week. That's okay. Your body wasn't ready for it yet. You still have to adapt. As you go up, 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 maybe you only add a few miles every month of training. You just keep it there until you slowly are able to do 25, 30, 35 miles per week. And maybe you're not able to even hold 35 miles per week for that long before you have to deload. That's okay. You're just trying to really slowly, gradually expose your body to these mileages. And at the start, all this mileages is really slow stuff. Stuff where you're not really letting your heart rate spike. Stuff where maybe you have to walk for 50% of the time. Maybe you can only run for a minute or two before your heart rate goes way too high. You need to walk again. That's okay. You just need to take it slow and allow your body enough time to make these adaptations. Okay? Next, you have to begin working in different paces, a different variety of paces. You need to be able to start doing stuff at your 1 mile effort, maybe something at your 5K effort, something at a 10K effort, something at your half marathon effort. And so you're going through the week and you're now adding more variety to your runs. You're not just doing the slow running and the sprint training or the speed training. At this point, hopefully your 100-meter dash is under 13 seconds. If not, you need to keep building your base, maybe add a little bit of faster stuff in there, some tempo work where all you're doing is maybe doing a fartlek workout where run for a minute and like jog for 2, run for a minute, jog for 2, run for a minute, jog for 2 at a faster pace. This is just to get your body used to running a little bit faster for a longer duration, but you're not running as fast as you can for that whole time. So you're just now starting to add a little bit of speed endurance to your training, okay? That's a little bit about that. And then after this is about a year in at this point, I started to add variety to my training, apart from just doing easy mileage and speed work. My 100-meter dash was under 13 seconds. I was able to run about 25 miles per week consistently after a year, right? Okay. An entire year, I was 25 to like 35 miles per week. That is how slow I had to add this mileage. And then I started training for my first half marathon, the Pittsburgh Half Marathon in 2023. I started a 12-week program, so I trained for this for 3 months, where it took me from about 25 miles per week all the way up to about 40 miles per week at the end of the training cycle, where I was doing easy runs, tempo runs, 5K effort, mile effort, interval workouts, and a long run every single week. This was really the first true program I followed that I had somebody else tell me exactly what to do. I got this program off of Training Peaks, because at this point I was still learning about what it takes to be a good endurance runner, like a good endurance athlete, a good long distance runner. So really I didn't know much yet. And at this point I was weighing around 195 to 205 pounds. When I started this training program, I continued to lose. I lost about another 20 pounds from this training program. So during this time, my paces were somewhere between 6:30 and a 9-minute mile. So I think my mile PR at this point was somewhere around 6 minutes, maybe 5:30 or something like that. So I was able to progress pretty quick with the speed. And again, going back to how fast you have to be, under 13 second 100 meters will help you so much. I cannot express that enough. I really do believe that is what allowed me to progress so quickly. I had this thing called speed reserve, so make sure you get fast. I'm gonna have a lot more videos on how to get fast, just absolutely fast. And so stick around. If you like this much information, make sure you come back for more. So after this training program, I did the Pittsburgh Half Marathon in, May of 2023. And I got this time in 1 hour and 36 minutes was my first half marathon, which felt great. You know, I trained pretty hard for it. I wanted more. I think I could have done that one a little bit faster looking back on it, but I had no idea how to pace it properly. But this was the first real training program I followed to get a sense of how to organize my training, right? After this half marathon, man, I was hooked. I was completely hooked. And then I started to do a little bit more like base training. I wanted to get my mile time down. I thought I wanted to be able to do a 5-minute mile. Turns out I was a little bit further away from that than I thought. But I started this base training period where I wanted to get my mileage up to about 50 miles per week over the summer of 2023. So that's what I did. I just kept adding miles. I did more speed training. I kept my speed up. I did things called strides. I did hill sprints. And all of these things culminated to me being able to run about 50 miles per week pretty consistently by the fall of 2023. Okay? Sorry, my bad. By the fall of 2023. Yeah, because we're in 2024 now. So by the fall of 2023, I was able to run about 50 miles per week. And I held that from anywhere from 40 to 50 miles per week for several months while I started to do a specific program for improving my mile time, which finally got me that 5-minute mile. And then right when I did my 5-minute mile, I rested about 1 week, and then I started my first marathon prep for the sub-3 hour marathon. So that's all I got for that. I think now it's time to get set up and start talking about the marathon build itself. So more or less, I spent 1.5 years straight of slowly building my mileage up to about 50 to 55 miles per week. I made sure I kept my speed, my 100-meter speed, under 13 seconds the entire time I was training for this, so that I had the speed reserve to add in more easy miles. When I was able to do plenty of easy miles, I added in 5K effort work, 10K effort work, threshold effort, which we'll get into that in another video. But basically, I varied my paces throughout the week, and I slowly extended my time I was able to spend at these longer paces to improve my endurance. But the first step, get time on your feet and get fast, okay? Whenever you do that, I recommend being able to run a half marathon in somewhere around 1 hour and 20 minutes to 1 hour and 25 minutes, so that you are in a good enough shape and you pretty much know you should be able to train for a sub-3 hour marathon. Now, you don't have to do this half marathon before you start training, but I do believe you should at least be able to run an 18-minute 5K. And I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of some of these details in another video. I wanted to give you guys a huge overview of all the training that went into this, and so that you can learn a little bit about me. You can see how monotone my voice is. I try to add some inflection, but you know, it's how I sound. So let me continue. So the start of the sub-3 hour program, right? Started with base training. First 2 weeks, still base training, building that mileage up. At this point, I got my mileage up to about 60 miles per week, and I was able to hold that very consistently throughout the 14 weeks that I trained for the Cleveland Marathon in 2024. Okay? During this time, I continued to try to keep my speed under 13 seconds per 100 meter, right? So this is a sub 4-minute mile pace, if you're wondering, but only for 100. I couldn't do it. I couldn't even hold that for one lap right now. That's okay. You just need to have that absolute speed. Okay? Then, the number one priority for this marathon build in the base phase, so the first 6 to 8 weeks of this training block, was build my threshold effort and extend my long run and maintain or build total speed. Number one, build my threshold efforts. So, threshold effort is more or less this speed at which you could run for an hour all out. Okay, so your threshold effort, if you find the pace that you're able to hold for 1 hour straight, that's going to be your threshold. Usually these runs are anywhere from 15 to 35 minutes long, and you progress from the low end to the high end of that. You can do intervals at threshold effort, but for this program, I just started with 15 minutes at that threshold effort, sandwich in between easy running. And each week for the next 8 weeks, I added about 5 minutes onto those threshold runs, still keeping the same amount of easy mileage on either end of it. Next, I added miles to my long run. So over those course of the time, I had already built up to being able to do 14 to 15 mile long runs pretty easily on the weekends. So this was something I was already doing consistently, at least 10 miles, right? So I wasn't just having to add these huge runs out of nowhere. I was already doing it. I had already been doing it for over a year. I was doing these longer runs. So this is what you need to do. You cannot go into a marathon build if you're not already doing long runs, right? So my first long run was about 14 or 15 miles, if I remember correctly. And then each week for 8 weeks, I added 1 to 2 miles onto my long run until I did a 24-mile or long run at a easy pace to a little bit faster than easy pace. Make sure I fuel the whole time, of course, but that was the first phase of the marathon build. All the other stuff, that was easier running. I had some interval workouts mixed in there to get some other speed work going, like 10K effort stuff. So if you were to race 6.2 miles as fast as you can, I did some work at that speed as well. That's a little bit faster than what your threshold effort would be most of the time. Depending on how fast you are, it changes. However, that was the first phase. Second phase was you're basically just trying to, the number one goal is to extend the amount of time you can spend at your marathon pace, right? So now I had more marathon pacing within my weekly runs, more marathon pacing in my long runs, and I still kept my mileage up. And every couple of weeks, I did some sprints to maintain that sub 13-ish second 100-meter dash. When I got into this point, I definitely started feeling a little bit slower. And it's okay, you will lose some speed with all this marathon pace work, and that's okay. But you want to do everything you can to maintain that speed, okay? With the marathon pace runs, I did about six days a week of training. Monday, rest day. Tuesday, it was either a marathon pace run or a 10K effort run. Sometimes that's where the hill sprints went or the flat sprints went. On Friday, I had another session where maybe it was a steady pace, so something a little bit slower than what your marathon pace is going to be, or it was another marathon pace run which with faster running mixed in with the marathon pacing. Saturday, easy running. Sunday, I always had my long run. The for the long runs, when you start building and extending your time at marathon pace, that's when you want to make sure you're not doing too much too soon, but you need to maintain the length of your long runs for a long, long time. So I got all the way up to that 24 to 25 mile long run in the first phase of this training. And then after that, you need to build and extend that marathon pace, right? So the first workout I did 8 by 1 mile. So 8 times 1 mile at my marathon pace, my goal marathon pace, which was 6:52 per mile. A lot of these miles I did definitely way too fast, and you probably will too when you do this, but that's okay. This should be the easiest long run of the build, but it should feel unusually difficult, right? So you're really only doing 8 miles and you have about 2 to 3 minutes rest in between each mile at marathon pace. And you're gonna ask yourself, how in the hell am I gonna run 26.2 miles at this pace when it seems unbelievably difficult just to do 8 miles with rest in between each mile? Anyway, so you're doing that workout, again, sandwiched between easy running. That total workout was about 16 miles. So I had warmed up with 4 miles, did that workout, did some jogging in between the reps, and then did a 4 mile cool down. So you're holding on to that mileage as long as you can. Then that same principle applies every week. You're just doing a little bit more. You're doing a little bit more total effort at your marathon pace, still trying to do some interval training, still trying to keep your speed, till I eventually got all the way to the end where I did my final marathon workout 2 weeks before the marathon. It was 3 times 10K, so 3 times 6.2 miles, right, at my marathon effort or marathon pace. So the first 10K was pretty easy. I was ready. I was in great shape. And I started overheating. Second 10K, still hit the times. It was okay. Third 10K, barely finished it. I was a little too slow at the end. And this can be pretty nerve-wracking if a workout like this goes as hard as that. But you have to remember that you've accumulated so much fatigue over the course of your training cycle that you are not able to show how good of shape you are in, okay? When you have that much fatigue on you, your body is tired, like you're exhausted, work is starting to get difficult, you're really not able to show how much you have in the tank, like how much potential you have. That is why you have to go through at least a 2-week taper period for a marathon like this. So that first week of the taper, so now I got the last week, it was super hard training, that was the last thing. And then we had the very last week, the last 2 weeks of the marathon build, which is the taper. That first week of the taper, you do about 75% of your total mileage, maybe a little bit less, maybe even like 60% of your total mileage. You gotta make sure that you recover. And then the last week of the taper, I think it's safe to do somewhere around like 30% of your total mileage, maybe even less if you feel really beat up. But you gotta make sure you do a little bit of work in that taper period. And in another video, I will break down what a taper period looks like. I'll break down what threshold is. I'll break down how to extend your marathon pace. I'm gonna break down everything you guys need to know to run a sub-3 hour marathon as fast as you possibly can, as smart as you possibly can, and how to do it without getting injured. My name is Kyle Ditzenberger. I'm a doctor of physical therapy and a strength and conditioning coach, and now a running coach and sub-3 hour marathoner. This is my journey and my tips and tricks and my step-by-step guide on how to assist you in running your own sub-3 hour marathon. Thanks for watching. Come back next time. Hope I can help you guys out for a long, long time. Peace out.
Hey, it's me.